Your ancestors were dark, every single one of them. For hundreds of thousands of years, there was no other option. And then slowly, invisibly, silently, the sun started writing a new instruction into the human genome. And what it wrote changed everything about what humans look like today. This is the story of why your skin is the color it is. And the answer is stranger and more beautiful and more uncomfortable than almost anything you have been told about it. Let us start with where humans actually came from. Homo sapiens appeared in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. Africa near the equator receives some of the most intense ultraviolet radiation on the surface of the planet. UV radiation is not a mild inconvenience. It destroys DNA. It degrades essential nutrients. It causes mutations in skin cells that lead to cancer. It obliterates a vitamin called folate that is critical for healthy pregnancies, without which fetuses do not develop correctly. Exposed pale skin under equatorial African sunlight is not just uncomfortable, it is catastrophically dangerous over a lifetime, and especially dangerous for reproduction. So early humans evolved a defense. That defense is called melanin. Melanin is a biological pigment produced by specialized cells called melanocytes, embedded in your skin. It works by absorbing UV radiation before that radiation can penetrate deep enough to reach your DNA and cause damage. The more melanin your skin contains, the darker it appears and the more UV protection it provides. Dark skin in Africa was not a cosmetic accident. It was a finely calibrated piece of survival technology shaped over millions of years by one of the most powerful forces in evolutionary history: the sun. Here is something most people have never been told about where dark skin actually came from. Our earliest human ancestors were not dark-skinned. Our primate ancestors were covered in thick, dense body hair. Under that hair, their skin was pale. Pale skin under fur works fine. The fur itself handles the UV problem. But somewhere around 1.2 million years ago, early humans in Africa began losing their body hair. The leading explanation is that losing body hair allowed more efficient cooling through sweating on the open savanna, where our ancestors were now spending enormous amounts of time running and hunting in direct sunlight. Losing the hair solved the overheating problem, but it created a catastrophic new one. Suddenly, pale skin was exposed to equatorial African UV radiation with no protection at all. Sunburn, folate destruction, DNA damage, skin cancer before reproductive age. Natural selection responded rapidly and dramatically. Within a relatively short evolutionary period, the exposed skin of these newly hairless humans darkened significantly. Dark skin was the innovation. It was the upgrade. It was the solution that made everything that followed possible. Then humans started moving. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, modern humans began migrating out of Africa. They moved into the Middle East. They moved into Europe. They moved into Central Asia. They moved further north than any member of our genus had ever lived. And as they moved north, one thing changed more dramatically than anything else: the quality of the sunlight. The further north you travel, the lower the sun sits in the sky. The lower the sun sits, the more atmosphere its UV radiation has to pass through before it reaches the ground. The more atmosphere it passes through, the weaker it becomes. In Northern Europe, for months at a time, the UV radiation reaching the ground is so weak that it barely registers as UV at all. And this created a problem that nobody anticipated and nobody planned for. Your body uses UV radiation from sunlight to manufacture vitamin D. Vitamin D is not optional. You cannot function without it. It regulates your bones, your immune system, your muscle function, your mood, your reproductive capacity. Without sufficient vitamin D, bones soften and deform. Children develop rickets. Immune systems become compromised. Fertility declines. Populations that cannot produce enough vitamin D die out slowly across generations. And in Northern Europe, there was simply not enough UV radiation reaching the ground to penetrate dark skin and trigger sufficient vitamin D production. The melanin that had been life-saving in Africa was now blocking the already weak northern sunlight before the body could use it. The same biological feature that protected African populations from UV damage was now preventing northern populations from getting enough UV radiation to survive. Natural selection has no mercy and no sentiment. Individuals in northern populations who happened to carry genetic mutations producing slightly less melanin absorbed slightly more of the weak northern sunlight. Their vitamin D production was slightly better. Their health was slightly better. Their survival rates were slightly higher. Their children were slightly more numerous. Those children inherited the lighter skin genes. Over generation after generation spanning thousands of years, lighter skin spread through northern populations, not because anyone chose it, not because it was inherently better, but simply because it helped the people who had it survive where they were living. This is natural selection operating exactly as it always does. Blind, mechanical, patient, and extraordinarily effective. Here is the part that most people find genuinely surprising. This lightening of European skin did not happen gradually across hundreds of thousands of years. Genetic analysis has shown it happened relatively recently and relatively rapidly. Scientists have identified specific genes responsible for lighter skin in European populations. One of the most important is SLC24A5, which controls melanin production. A single mutation in this gene reduces melanin output dramatically. Analysis of ancient DNA shows that this mutation spread through European populations approximately 8,000 years ago, which means that people living in Europe 10,000 years ago were still quite dark-skinned. Ancient DNA extracted from a 10,000-year-old British human nicknamed Cheddar Man confirmed this. He had dark to black skin, blue eyes, and dark curly hair. He looked nothing like modern British people. The lightning happened after him. The reason it accelerated so dramatically in the last 8,000 years is almost certainly connected to agriculture. When early hunter-gatherers lived in northern Europe, they ate enormous quantities of fish and animals that were naturally rich in vitamin D, salmon, seal meat, reindeer. These foods provided enough dietary vitamin D to partially compensate for dark skin blocking the weak northern sunlight. But around 10,000 years ago, farming arrived in Europe spreading from the Middle East. Farmers stopped eating oily fish and game. They ate grain. Grain contains almost no vitamin D. Suddenly, northern European populations had both weak sunlight and a dietary shift that eliminated their secondary source of vitamin D. The pressure on lighter skin became enormous. Lighter-skinned farmers survived better, had healthier children, and spread their genes through northern populations at a rate that accelerated dramatically. The diet changed first. The skin followed. The same process played out independently across the world. In East Asia, different populations moving to higher latitudes also developed lighter skin. But the genetic mutations responsible are completely different from the European ones. East Asian lighter skin and European lighter skin evolved separately through completely different biological pathways. Same problem. Different continents, different genes, same solution. Scientists call this convergent evolution, nature solving the same problem multiple times with different tools. The fact that it happened independently on multiple continents confirms that lighter skin at high latitudes was not a random accident. It was a biological necessity that evolution discovered over and over again. Meanwhile, near the equator, nothing changed. In sub-Saharan Africa, the UV radiation is still intense enough to cause serious damage without melanin protection. Populations that remained near the equator retained dark skin because the selective pressure that created dark skin in the first place never went away. This is why Africa contains more skin tone diversity than every other continent combined. Humans have lived in Africa for longer than anywhere else. More time means more variation from the original baseline across different local UV environments. The Hadza of Tanzania, the San people of southern Africa, the Nile Valley populations of Sudan, all different, all African, all shaped by their specific local relationship with the sun. Here is what the science of skin color actually tells us about the concept of race. Genetic analysis has shown that the differences between so-called racial groups in terms of overall genetic variation are smaller than the differences found between individual chimpanzee groups in the same forest. The genetic variation within any human population is larger than the variation between populations. Skin color is controlled by dozens of genes, each with multiple variants. It varies continuously, not in discrete categories. It varies within families, within siblings. It is not a reliable indicator of any other genetic characteristic. It is a single biological dial set by the UV environment your ancestors lived in for enough generations to matter. Skin color is a record. Every shade that exists in the human species today is a memory of a latitude, a sunlight level, a journey taken by specific people across specific landscapes over thousands of years. The skin you are in right now contains within it the entire geographic history of your ancestors, compressed into the concentration of one biological pigment. That is extraordinary. It is not a category. It is not a hierarchy. It is not a destiny. It is geography. It is time. It is light. It is the oldest story the human body carries. The sun made us dark to protect us. The sun made us lighter when we moved away from it. And if we moved back to the equator for long enough, it would make our descendants dark again. The body is not rigid. It has never been rigid. It is responsive. It is adaptive. It is always answering the same question that evolution has been asking for 300,000 years. How do we survive where we are right now? Your skin is the current answer. Every ancestor you have ever had survived long enough to pass something on. Every one of them, going back millions of years. And what they passed on most visibly is simply their relationship with the sun at the latitude where they lived. That is all skin color has ever been. That is all it will ever be.